Evening. Good to see everybody here. Glad to have those of you that are watching online with us as well. Just a couple in-house notes. There will be no Bible study Wednesday, December 28th. So we'll take that week off. I'm going to get a little bit of vacation in, and so we'll resume the following week, which I think is going to be the fourth. Somebody will correct me, I'm sure. All right. Also, want to let everybody know that this year for Celebration Christmas weekend, we're going to do one service. It's going to be Christmas Eve, and this service is going to be like a Sunday morning service, but it'll be a little bit more interactive with Christmas carol singing and different things like that. So it's going to be Christmas Eve at 6 p.m., and we would love to pack this place out. And so grab an invite card, take a couple with you, and invite some folks to join you. It's going to be a beautiful evening together. We're going to have some Christmas cookies and hot chocolate and coffee afterwards, and so it's going to be a wonderful evening. We're going to do classic Christmas caroling, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I've got a special message that night, but that's going to be our night to worship. And then what we're going to encourage everybody with on Sunday morning is enjoy time with your family. But here's what else I would like to ask, because I know there's always tension about, Sunday morning I need to worship God and all that. Well, yeah, absolutely. Here, how about this idea? How about you worship God by actually going and being the church Christmas morning to somebody? So whether that's maybe help a neighbor out, maybe it is to serve someplace. We have to remember you don't go to church. All right, we've got to lose that mentality. That is not the mentality of Jesus. We are the church. So wherever your location is, you are the church. And so we're going to worship corporately Saturday night, and Sunday we're going to be the church wherever life finds us. And we just want to encourage you in that. All right? Well, we got a lot of interesting things to talk about tonight as we unpack chapters 18 and 19. So let's ask God to bless our time together, and then we're going to jump into it. Heavenly Father, so grateful for the time to be here tonight. Just pray your blessing over it. And I would just ask that you would be with those that are on our prayer list that are battling some health issues and have some other life circumstances. And Father, would your Spirit lead, guide, and direct us as we talk about Jesus' revelation to John. And Father, what that means to us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I want to go back to the beginning before we catch up to today. All right, remember, Jesus' revelation to John, all right, was a letter written to 7 churches. Okay, these were geographical located churches. And in the first couple chapters, Jesus is commending and rebuking and admonishing these churches. All right, telling them what they're doing really well, telling them what they need to correct and what they're doing wrong, and trying to encourage them to do that. And what all 7 of these churches had in common is they are facing some level of persecution, all right, and they're dealing with some things. And so the letter of Revelation is to help give them the courage and hope as they are going through these times. And what makes this letter so interesting is that while Jesus is talking to these 7 specific churches, these 7 specific churches also represent churches in general today. You'll find the very same things. And so Jesus' message 2,000 plus years ago to that culture is just as relevant as it is 2,000 years later to our culture. And so as we've been going through the book of Revelation, this is a letter where we should find hope and encouragement. If you're finding fear and you're like, oh, this is crazy and all that, you're really missing what the point of the revelation of Jesus Christ is all about. This is a letter of hope. This is a letter of promise. This is a letter of what is to come. And what will really help us is reminding ourselves that this is not our home. All right? This is not our home. We are strangers in a strange land as Christ followers. God intends so much more for us, and we have to trust the process until we eventually find ourselves in God's kingdom. And on top of that, we also have to be careful as how we approach this letter. And so I talked to us a few weeks ago where I said, here in the Western culture, because we are so time-oriented, everything to us is about time. Everything is very linear. And so when we start, hearing days and hours and things like that, in our minds, we kind of look linearly at some things. And sometimes that leads us to come to some conclusions that maybe Jesus didn't really intend for us to have. So we go back and we look, okay, well, how would John and how would John's disciples, how would they have thought? And so the Jews thought in terms of cycles. And we're going to see that tonight in the 2 chapters that we study. So, as we approach tonight's chapters, I want us to think in terms of rebellion. Because a lot of the terminology and a lot of the things that we are going to read tonight all has to do with rebellion. And so we're going to break this down into 2 sections. The first section is going to be the ecclesiastical Babylon. All right? Now, the word ecclesiastical relates to church or religious system, especially an established institution suitable for use in a church. All right? Think ecclesiastical, think religious system. Does not have to be Christianity. All right? It could be Buddhism. It could be Brahmanism. It could be, Satanism, anything. All right? Just think religious system. And so our first chapter tonight is going to be dealing with the ecclesiastical Babylon. Now, those that take a literal approach believe that the city of Babylon is going to be rebuilt in present-day Iraq, which is where it was originally located, and it's going to be the seat of power and all this. But I think what people that think in terms of literalists in that sense, they're missing the bigger picture. Because when it came to Babylon, Babylon represented one thing to the Jews. All right? It represented rebellion. Babylon is any world system that rebels against Creator God. And the reason they equate Babylon with rebellion is because Babylon became synonymous with the ultimate rebellion. Think about what the Babylonians did to the Jewish people. They invaded their homeland, they wiped out everything, and they took captive all these young Jewish people and took them back to Babylon, where they had name changes, they had job changes, their entire way of life and culture was interrupted for a 70-year period. And so this has always stuck in the mind of the Jew. And so Jews would often use Babylon to represent this evil, rebellious world system, because that's what their ancestors experienced, and that's how they related. So when we approach it like this, tonight's chapters are going to make so much more sense to us as we get into it. All right, so let's take a look at the symbology going on by simply looking at the first 3 verses, which talk about the woman and the scarlet beast. Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me. Come, and I will show you the judgment. Now remember, the 7 bowls were all God's judgment, right? Of the notorious prostitute who is seated on many waters. So this is a really huge prostitute, right? The kings of the earth committed sexual immorality with her, and those who live on the earth became drunk on the wine of her sexual immorality. Then he carried me away in the spirit to a wilderness. So let me just pause right there. All right? A lot of imagery going on here. We have this incredibly huge prostitute that is able to sit on all the waters, and all the world leaders come to her, right? No? Okay, that would be ridiculous. All right, so let's not take a literalist view here. Remember, the best way to interpret Revelation is to think Old Testament. In the Old Testament, what did God equate idolatry with? In other words, what went hand in hand with idolatry? How would he describe it? Adultery. All right? That idolatry and adultery, when a husband cheats on a wife or a wife cheats on a husband, it is the same thing as when an individual cheats on God and goes after other gods, other idols. All right? In fact, you see this kind of language all through the Old Testament. Remember the prophet Hosea? God told Hosea, I want you to go marry a prostitute. All right? You're going to go marry a prostitute. And you're going to stay married to her no matter what happens. And of course, Hosea, number one, is like, okay, well, a Jewish person would never do that, but God, you're telling me to do that, so I'll do that. So he marries Gomer, all right? And Gomer ends up cheating on him. And God says, you go get her and bring her back. Well, that was a picture. What was it a picture of? It was a picture of God's faithfulness to his people, even though they committed spiritual adultery by cheating on God all the time with all these Canaanite religions. So God has always equated sexual immorality and spiritual adultery as these two pictures, because what is it at the end of the day? Adultery is simply this, all right? It's far more than cheating on somebody. It is breaking a covenant. That's what adultery is. You are breaking a covenant. What is a covenant? It is a contract. It is an agreement. It is a promise that I will remain faithful to you. And so one of the reasons why it is so painful when a spouse commits adultery is because that contract, that agreement, that promise has been broken. In the same way, God views his relationship in the Old Testament to the Jewish people and said, I'm going to make a covenant with you. And if you will follow this covenant, we're going to have a beautiful relationship. But if you break this covenant, it's going to break our relationship, just like sexual immorality breaks relationships. So now, fast forward, Revelation 17, we now have this imagery going on. So a prostitute is what? Someone who breaks covenant over and over and over. And how do they do it? By committing sexual immorality. All right, what does sexual immorality represent? Spiritual idolatry. All right, spiritual adultery. Okay? And not only that, verse 2, the kings of the earth commit sexual immorality with her. What do? They shake their fist at Yahweh and they go after everything else but the Creator. All right, it's the whole Romans 1 system, okay, where Paul talked about that. And the kings have become drunk on the wine of the sexual immorality. Like, this doesn't just happen once. This is ongoing. It's over. It's over. It is an infectious disease. It is a habit. Just as someone that is an alcoholic, all right, can't help themselves. They continually are committing spiritual adultery against God. Now, when you think in terms of that, all right, doesn't it make a lot more sense? So whether it's a person that's an atheist that just claims to believe in nothing except humanity, what are they worshiping? Humanism, humanity, all right? Or it's Islam or Hinduism or one of the gods of the Canaanites or all that. It is rebelling against Yahweh, okay? Yahweh. So this angel is giving John this big imagery of this, all right? And the many waters, we're going to find out later, are people groups, all right? So let me ask you, is this a global problem? Yes, it's a global problem. All right, so back to verse 3. Then he carried me away in the Spirit to a wilderness. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. Remember we talked about the beast system a few weeks ago. That was covered with blasphemous names. What's a blasphemous name? Well, any name that speaks against God. All right? And it had 7 heads and 10 horns. Okay, we've seen this imagery before, haven't we? All right? It's talking about what? Authority and leadership. I doubled it there, but jump down to verse 4. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, jewels, and pearls. All right. What's one of the best ways to learn? Word pictures, right? Okay? Descriptive word pictures. So, here you have this prostitute that is adorned in all this. So, that prostitute is a metaphor for false religion. Okay? Again, you can pick it. It can be any false religion. All right? It's worldwide. It's going all over the place. All right? And she's adorned in all of this fancy garb. Why? Well, prostitutes in John's day usually dressed to entice people. They wanted you to know what they did. All right? Which, by the way, is one of the reasons why in one of Paul's letters, he asked the women to dress modestly. Because in the culture, when you didn't dress modestly, one of two things was going along. Either you were incredibly wealthy, which that wasn't a problem, or you were a prostitute. Right? So that's the reason for the modesty. So it's arrayed. This woman is arrayed in purple and scarlet. There's gold. There's jewels. There's pearls. Holding in her hand, what? What is she holding in her hand? A golden cup filled with everything detestable and with impurities of her prostitution. Okay, let's take the word detestable. Detestable is what? Anything that makes you what? Sick. All right? We all have things that are detestable to us. Mayonnaise. All right? I will not eat anything with mayonnaise. If I even suspect it has mayonnaise in it, I won't touch it. It's detestable to me. All right? I hate it. I hate it. You have your own things that you find detestable. All right? Whatever that might look like. Impurities. What's impurity? Anything that is what? Unholy. All right? Or impure. Okay? So, it could be all 7 deadly sins. Lust, greed, gluttony, on down through the list. All right? But humanity's come up with all kinds of impurities, haven't we? Okay? What's in this gold cup? It's representative of everything that God detests and that God finds impure. Why? Because it's rebellion. It's rebellion against God. All right? With the impurities of her prostitution, what's she doing? She's enticing people to buy into false religious systems. And as they do that, they grab onto detestable thoughts and ideas and truths, which leads to impurities of all kinds. All right? And by the way, is this only going on in John's day? No, it has been going on since Satan tempted Adam and Eve and got him kicked out of the garden, and it will continue to go on. It's going on in our day and will continue to until Jesus comes back. All right? So again, think rebellion. On her forehead was written a name, a mystery. Now remember, this isn't Scooby-Doo. All right, this isn't a whodunit kind of mystery. This is something, mysterion in Greek, something that hasn't yet been revealed. All right, Paul talked a lot about the mystery of the gospel. In other words, God didn't unveil his plan to humanity all at once. He's done it in bits and pieces. Okay? That's why you and I, in a couple weeks here, we're going to celebrate Christmas, all right, which actually didn't happen this time of year, but that's a story for another night. And we're going to celebrate that, and we're going to, talk about, the shepherds out in the field and all that. And when that happened, all the shepherds are out there going, what is going on? This is crazy, blah, blah, blah. And now we read it, and we're like, oh, that makes complete sense, and that is so cool. Why? The mystery's been revealed. All right, so God, down through the ages, reveals these mysteries. So, this prostitute, all right, she's got a name, all right, was written a name. It's a mystery. Okay, it's something not yet revealed. Now, why the forehead? Well, again, think Jewish. What was on the forehead? The Shema, right? Okay? Keep God close to you at all times. All right, so this is the anti-Shema here. Babylon the Great. All right? In Daniel's day, Babylon was a world empire. It was considered great. But remember, Babylon is now this system, okay, this philosophy. The mother of prostitutes. The city? No. The concept. All right? and of the detestable things of the earth. So, in the Jewish Shema, they would have, bits of scripture in Deuteronomy and love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength, on their hand, the forehead. But this prostitute has the exact opposite of that. All right? It's celebrating, it's worshiping the world system and the things that are detestable to God and the things of earth. So it's doing the exact opposite of the Shema. It's the anti-Shema. Then I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. Okay, what was going on in John's day? Unbelievable martyrdom. All right? Christians were being killed for their faith. Started with Jesus himself, right? Was that the only time in history that the people of God were martyred? No. It happened to the prophets all the time. It happened to other godly people down through history. Does it happen today in modern times? Absolutely. Okay, you see the cycle? You see the cycle that's being repeated here? This woman is drunk with the blood of the saints. These false religious systems, what do? They kill the truth. They want to suppress the truth with the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Have you ever watched the nightly news or get your news from the internet, from your phone or whatnot, and you're just like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. I can't believe I'm reading this. All right? John is getting like information download of just the wickedness of the world all at once. So he's greatly astonished, almost overwhelmed, all right, with man's wickedness. I just read an article today about a Russian soldier who defected in this whole war with Ukraine, and his whole unit is going around raping women, killing the fathers, and raping the daughters. Okay? That's going on right now in 2022 over in Ukraine. All right? And see, God sees that. He sees all that going on. And while we would like for him to put a stop to it right this second, the reality is God is promising to put a stop to it. But this isn't the only time in history this kind of stuff's gone on. It's been building and building and building. That's why it's called Babylon the Great, because this is a worldwide system. And false religion propagates it. It causes it to expand. It causes it to speed up. And so John is just like astonished. So John is just like, what's going on here? All right, so the angel's going to help define. Well, then the angel said to me, why are you astonished? In other words, why are you surprised? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was, past tense, and is not, doesn't currently exist, and is about to come, future tense, up from the abyss and go to destruction. Well, let's stop right there. All right, so you have this beast, all right, which is not an animal, it's not an alien, okay? It's think in terms of system that was. Have there been world empire systems that shake their fist against God? Absolutely. What would be the most common modern day equivalent to that? What world system can you think of that openly, defiantly shakes its fist at God? Maybe not so much right now, but I know in the 80s growing up it was certainly going on. What was it? Communism is an example of that. All right? It's all about humanism. Before that, you had Nazism. You have all these isms, okay? And so this beast is representative of that. All right? It existed sometimes in the past and is not. Sometimes it kind of goes away for a while, okay? The United States of America, there's no argument about this. It's a historical fact, was built on the Judeo-Christian ethic. There was a time in our country where even if you were not a believer, you lived by a particular Judeo-Christian ethic. Our laws were built on it and all of that. In the last several decades, that's begun to be dismantled. All right? But during that time, did you have an anti-God agenda going on in our country? Not so much. I mean, behind the scenes you might have some, but out in public square, out in, in general populace, no. It was there. But what's happens? Are we living in an anti-God culture today? There's no argument. There's absolutely no argument. All right? So the beast it's been there in the past, is not. There are time periods where it gets suppressed and is about to come up from the abyss. And then it rears its ugly head. Those who live on the earth, whose names, now the angel identifies who gets sucked into this, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. All right? Who are those people? Non-believers. Okay? Doesn't matter whatever other religion they may claim, it's just they do not accept Jesus as Messiah. Okay? Will be astonished when they see the beast that was and is not and is to come. So this becomes even shocking to the world at large. So this calls for a mind that has wisdom. We've heard this before, right? Okay? The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Well, in the first century, guess what sat on 7 hills? Rome. It was the city of 7 hills. Does anybody know in America what the city of 7 hills is today? Anybody know? Come on, Bob. I'll give you a quarter. Cincinnati, Ohio. Cincinnati, Ohio. It's got seven hills. All right? Yeah, you can use that one. Feel free. Okay? It's free. I won't charge you for it. You can impress all your friends with that. I only know that because I lived there for 3 years. All right? But because they used to call it Little Rome. All right? So, the 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings. All right? 5 have fallen. Oh, do these world systems come and go? Yes. Okay. Is communism today the same as it was in 1986? No. All right. One is, there's always one. Okay. And the other has not yet come. Something else is going to come. What do we see happening here? A cycle. Why? Because that's how Jewish people think. They think in terms of cycles. And when he comes, he must remain for only a little while. So what? Whatever the system is, it has a shelf life. All right? What was the goal of Adolf Hitler? His legit goal, what was it? What did he want to accomplish? Well, that was part of his manifesto, but he wanted worldwide dominion. Okay? He wanted to rule the world. All right? And he was well on his way to doing that until he was stopped. And his kingdom lasted, I can't remember when he came to power, sometime back in the 1930s, but it came to stop in 1945. It was less than 10 years. Okay? So it was only, what? A little while. All right? Babylon. Babylon was a great empire. Didn't last all that long. All right? And here's what we see. Empires have shelf lives. What does that mean for the United States of America? We have a shelf life. We don't know what it is, but we do have a shelf life. We will only be here so long. And eventually something else will take its place. All right? And that's maybe sounds discouraging, but that is the way of the world. That's how it goes. All right? Well, the beast that was and is not is itself an 8th king. Now, what does a king have? Authority, right? Dominion, power. But it belongs to the 7 and is going to destruction. In other words, it's related to all these other systems. And it's going to suffer the same fate. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they will receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. Oh, so only an hour, 24 hours, or 24 hours. No. 60 minutes. There we go. I got to relearn math. All right? No, it's not 1 hour. It's just a short period of time. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. These will make war against the Lamb. See, rebellion. But the Lamb will conquer them because he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Folks, as discouraged as you get with our culture as we see it go downhill, Jesus is going to overcome it. Okay? Relax. He will overcome it. Because he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And those with him are called chosen and faithful. Think about that for a moment. As a follower of Jesus, he calls you chosen and faithful. He also said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute was seated are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. All right, so you get that imagery there? Represents what? Humanity. Humanity. And what is humanity doing? In open rebellion to Yahweh. The 10 horns that you saw in the beast will hate the prostitute. All right? They will make her desolate and naked, devour her flesh, and burn her up with fire. Well, wait a minute. I thought they are all in cahoots together. Well, they are, but what does the world do with one another? We fight. For God has put it in their hearts to carry out his plan by having one purpose and to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. In other words, what? This is going to continue to go on this way until God finally says it's time to stop. And the woman you saw is the great city that has royal power over the kings of the earth. All right? Again, taking a symbolic view of this, city represents what? Authority, power, the seat from which all of this stuff comes from. Okay? And it exercises authority over the earth. So let me ask you, no matter what nation you're from, are all kingdoms that we're aware of today in open rebellion against Yahweh? Yes. Is our nation today in open rebellion against Yahweh? Yes. We are. We may not like to think of it, but we are. All right? Because we have rejected his ethics. We've rejected God. All right? We may have God, in God we trust, on our money. The question is, what God? Because just because it says God, our problem is that we equate Yahweh and God as the same thing. God is a generic term. It's just a term. Okay? It could be a little g when we put a capital next to it. That means big G, but that's not his covenantal name. What's his covenantal name? It's Yahweh. Okay? It's Yahweh. That's why in Islam, they call him Allah. It's not the same. Allah is not the same as Yahweh. All right? Not the same at all. It's just in English, we use God and we just generalize it that way. Okay? All right. So that is the ecclesiastical Babylon, the religious system and all of the evil that it causes. Now, let's look at the fall of commercial Babylon. Okay? Commercial Babylon. And this is going to be chapter 18. When the system collapses, it's going to be huge. After this, I saw another angel with great authority coming down from heaven, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. Why? Because he's coming from the presence of God. Remember when Moses was in God's presence, what did his face do? It shone, right? So he's coming from the presence of God. He called out in a mighty voice, "It has fallen." What has fallen? The system. Okay? Babylon the Great has fallen. Rebellion's time is up. She has become a home for what? What lives in this world system? This is huge. Do not miss this verse right here. She has become a home for demons, okay? A haunt for every unclean spirit, a haunt for every unclean bird, a haunt for every unclean and despicable beast. Now, when you talk birds and unclean beasts, okay, what are you thinking of? Jewishness, right? Because the Jews had very specific cleanliness laws. There were certain avians that were unclean, and there were certain animals, like the pig, that were unclean. All right, we're Gentiles. We don't think in terms like that. But I want you to see something very quickly. What is behind every single one of these world systems? Demons and unclean spirits. That's why the Apostle Paul emphatically said, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and the principles of this dark world. Listen, it is not the president that makes all the decisions for our country. It is not the Senate. It is not the House of Representatives that is making all the decisions. Biblically speaking, there are supernatural forces behind every world empire. And as America moves further and further away from the Judeo-Christian ethic, these entities are going to gain ground. Why do you think we see things happening faster than we ever have before? Because we have openly given ourselves over to these things. Nobody has to erect a statue on their behalf. They don't care about that. Nobody has to praise Satan. All right? You don't have to become a satanic country. No. You just rebel against God, and these things move right on in. And guess where they start moving in first? The families. And as they sweep through families, as they are coming in through all kinds of different, technical and educational and all these different things, it just gets in that much quicker. All right? So Babylon the Great's fallen. The system. Why? Because it's infested with these entities that are bent on rebelling against God. We're going to see this in the next chapter as well. But listen, this is also true of the United States. I'm not trying to be weird. I'm not trying to be sensationalistic. This is just a reality that we as believers have to be alert to and wise to. That's why we have to know what the Word of God says, or we will easily be deceived. And it happens all the time. Happens all the time. For all the nations. Oh, what does that word all mean? All, right? Well, that can only, John is obviously just writing to the first century. Well, John may only be writing to the first century, but Jesus is writing to whom? All. For all nations. Does that include the United States of America? Have drunk the wine of her sexual immorality. Okay, are we talking about pornography here? Or are we talking about, no. What are we talking about? Spiritual apostasy, spiritual adultery. What does spiritual adultery ultimately bring? Wrath. Judgment. One of the ways that God brings judgment, and this is my personal belief, all right? I believe that much like periods of Israel's history, God brings abandonment judgment. Like some people are like, oh, all these tornadoes, all these hurricanes, that's God. No, that's nature, all right? Well, these snowstorms, global warming, global cooling. No, that's nature. That's cyclical. No, all God has to do is when you say you don't want him around, he goes, okay. And he abandons and removes his hand of blessing. And as he does that, what begins to happen to a culture? We begin to spiral downhill. Sitting in this room right now, okay, we've got various demographics represented, watching online. You just think about when you were younger and the problems that you and your culture put up with. Is it worse today? About the same? Or better? It's worse. Why? I mean, when I went to school, literally, when I went to school, we had guys show up with loaded shotguns in their cars all the time, and nobody batted an eye. I carried a knife to school. Not to hurt somebody. It just was cool. Just what, no teacher ever pulled me aside. Nobody said, oh, you shouldn't have it. That's what you did. I grew up in a community, people went hunting. So they brought their guns with them because after school, what'd they do? They went out in the woods and they shot deer. Nobody said boo about it. And you know what? Nobody also went into a school and shot anybody up nor threatened to. It was not on the radar. Nobody would have thought like that. Try doing that today. Right? John, do you remember, right? Nope, nobody. Yeah. So, what's going on here? Well, this chapter's kind of explaining it. All the nations have drunk the wine of this sexual immorality, which brings wrath. Okay? What's God doing? God said, listen, if you are going to reject me, all right, I'll allow you to make that choice. I am withdrawing my hand of blessing. You get to deal with the consequences of it. And that's all God's doing. Okay? The kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality with her. Again, why is it going back to this kingship? Okay? Well, God created Adam and Eve. From Adam and Eve, humanity came on the scene. And humanity had a choice, just like Adam and Eve did. Side with Yahweh or oppose Yahweh. That's literally the choice of all humanity for thousands of years. Side with Yahweh or oppose Yahweh. The kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, spiritual adultery with her. With what? This system. And the merchants, now we're getting into it. The merchants of the earth have grown wealthy from her sensuality and excess. Let me ask you, as cultures degrade, who starts making money? Well, anybody can get in on the act, right? Okay. Government officials make money. Local officials make money. What's that? World leaders. Okay. So let's take a look at these merchants. Then I heard another voice from heaven. Come out of her, my people. Here's what's really interesting. Before God brings wrath, he always offers an escape route. And he says, listen, if you belong to me as Jesus, and to my son Jesus, come out from this. Okay? We are the called out ones. What are we called out from? From the world system, from this rebellion. So that you will not share in her sins. Why does God want his ecclesia, his people, to be different? Because if we're not, we're sharing in the sins of a fallen world that is going to be facing judgment or receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven. Boy, that's a long way. And God has remembered her crimes. Think about that statement. God has remembered every single injustice and crime ever committed. And it's high enough to reach his throne, which I'm guessing is somewhat of a great distance. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Pay her back the way she also paid, and double it according to her works. In the cup in which she mix a double portion to her. So as much greed and gluttony and adultery and deceit and all those things, the judgment is twice that. Why does it get really bad at the end? Because God's paying it back twice. Why? Because that's justice. As much as she glorified herself and indulged her sensual and excessive ways, again, do not think physical sexuality. It's just a metaphor. Give her that much torment and grief. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen. I am not a widow, and I will never see grief. Who says that? Pride. Pride says that. For this reason, her plagues will come in just one day. When God brings judgment, it will be swift. Death and grief and famine. She will be burned up with fire, because the Lord God who judges her is mighty. The kings of the earth who have committed sexual immorality and shared her sensual and excessive ways will weep and mourn over their sins? No, over her, when they see the smoke from her burning. What are they going to cry about? Losing what they had. They will stand far off in fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, Babylon the mighty, for in a single hour your judgment is come. The merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her, because no one buys their cargo any longer. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels, pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, scarlet. Everything that's enticing about this world system that people have gravitated to for the ages has all come to ruin. Fragrant wood products, objects of ivory, objects of expensive wood, brass, iron, marble. What are all these things? Value. Things that are valuable. Don't think it literally. Think things that are of value. What do you have that's valuable? That doesn't honor God? Cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, olive oil, fine flour, and grain, cattle, sheep, horses, carriages, slaves, human lives. What was all this stuff? This was all materialistic goods of John's day. If he was writing today, probably throwing computers and cars and airplanes and all that kind of stuff, but they didn't exist yet. But that's what that is. The fruit that you craved has left you. All your splendid and glamorous things are gone. They will never find them again. The merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand far off in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning. Why? Because they've lost it all. Saying, Woe, woe, the great city, dressed in fine linen, purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, jewels, and pearls, for in a single hour such fabulous wealth was destroyed. Let me ask you a question. Was Babylon literally destroyed? Yeah. It was destroyed by the Medo-Persians. The Medo-Persians, they came in and they destroyed it. Then guess who destroyed the Medo-Persians? Greeks. And Greece came in, they reigned for several hundred years, and or longer than that, and then guess who came in and took care of the Greeks? The Romans. And it's cycle after cycle after cycle. For in a single hour, such fabulous wealth was destroyed. Every shipmaster, seafarer, the sailors, and all who do business by sea stood far off, as they watched the smoke from her burning, and kept crying out, Who was like the great city? They threw dust on their heads and kept crying out, weeping and mourning. That dust, that's this idea of intense grief. Woe, woe, the great city, where all those who have ships on the sea became rich from her wealth. For in a single hour she was destroyed. Why does he keep saying single hour over and over and over? Because this stuff has been going on for so long. We're talking centuries and millennia. All right? And it's all going to come to ruin at some point, quickly. It's not going to take millennia for God to deal with this. He will do it swiftly and quickly. And everyone that sees it's going to be, I can't believe this. Now, here's where it gets good. All right? This is why you bought your ticket tonight. Okay? We're going to share a couple verses, and then we are going to close this out. Rejoice over her, heaven. And you, what? Saints, apostles, prophets. Well, think about it. Okay, saints are generalized Christians. We call them Christians today. Apostles were what? The 12 apostles? And prophets, talking Old Testament. What happened to all three categories over the centuries? They've all been martyred somehow, some way. Okay? People have gone to jail for the gospel. People have been killed for the gospel. The prophets of the Old Testament would bring a word from God. What would the kings do? They'd kill them because they didn't want to hear it. And so, what are they doing? They're rejoicing because finally justice has been done and they're being vindicated because God has pronounced on her the judgment she passed on you. Remember Peter when you were crucified because of Jesus? Do you remember Elisha when you were killed because of your faith? Then a mighty angel picked up a stone, like a large millstone, and threw it into the sea. Now, what's the sea represent? Yes, but in this last two chapters, it represents people groups. All right, threw it into the sea, saying, "In this way, Babylon, the great city, will be thrown down violently and never be found again." Just like he took this massive rock and threw it into the ocean, and it's going to spray water everywhere and scatter the water. All right, that's the imagery. That God's judgment is going to be swift, violent, and final. The sound of harpists, musicians, flutists, trumpeters will never be heard in you again. All I call this the Las Vegas passage, all the shows and all that kind of stuff. No craftsman of any trade will ever be found in you again. The sound of a mill will never be heard in you again. All those things that mankind has built up, that mankind has celebrated, that mankind has worshipped. The light of a lamp will never shine in you again. This system, this world system that has dominated humanity is done. And the voice of a groom and bride will never be heard of you again. Because even within an evil world system, joy happens, doesn't it? Joy happens. All this will happen because your merchants were the nobility of the earth, because all the nations were deceived by your sorcery. What sorcery is that? Well, we're back in chapter 17. What is it? The ecclesiastical Babylon, the false religions of the world. And in her was found the blood of prophets and saints, and all those slaughtered on the earth. And so God is bringing justice to all those who died for his name's sake. All right? That's where it starts. But we get to chapter 19 next week, and you're going to see a lot of rejoicing. All right? So, what have we learned tonight? Well, we've learned that what you and I call normal is actually rebellion. And God will deal with it. And those in Christ will one day celebrate. Why? Because all the evil that we've had to put up with and everybody else has had to put up with is going to be taken care of. And it's going to be very swift. We're not going to have to sit around and go, when is God going to be finished with this? No, it'll be quick. It'll be quick. So, thanks for joining us tonight. We're going to jump back into this next week. Appreciate you guys being here. Have a great night, everybody.